You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. For previous episodes, visit thinkingcountry.com or find the podcast on iTunes or SoundCloud by searching for Meet the Farmers. Hello everyone and welcome to the show. I hope you're having a great year so far. This is episode 59 of Meet the Farmers, which features Kent arable farmer Andy Howard, who I visited back in November last year. Andy farms around 300 hectares near Ashford. His main crop is winter wheat, but he's historically grown quite a varied rotation from winter barley, winter and spring beans and spring oats to triticale and linseed. Andy's principal focus is on maintaining good soil health, avoiding tillage and bare soil. From 2014 to 2016, he did a Nuffield scholarship about the potential for companion cropping in UK arable systems. I want to thank the Mercer Family Charitable Foundation for supporting this episode and Tom Bland for always help with production. For now though, let's dive into the episode. We began, perhaps inevitably, given the wet autumn, talking about the weather.
We've had 315 millimetres of rain since the 23rd of September. We've had 44 millimetres this week. A small part of the farm is underwater in the last couple of days, but yep, like everyone else, it's been a struggle this autumn. But it's farming and we have to get on and we have to cope.
Tell me a bit about your early life here, because I think I've read somewhere that you didn't necessarily want to be a farmer growing up, but you went to Durham to study environmental science.
Correct. In my early life, I did work on the farm from the age of, well, like most people, probably too young, age 12, 13, 14, but I had no aspirations at all to be a farmer. Did environmental science at Durham because I enjoyed geography and biology, and it was, something that I wanted to do. I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do afterwards. Did a bit of travelling. Had a summer job in Tesco's in my last year of university, and realised that maybe dealing with the general public isn't so great, and farming could be a good answer. And after travelling, I decided, I must have been 22 probably. Sort of said to Dad, well, I think farming might be for me. I'm interested. So he said, well, you need to go and learn about farming a bit more. And I went to Cirencester for a year's agricultural course and came home finally in 2003. So what's that, 16 years now, which has disappeared. I don't know where that's gone.
Where do you think that interest in conservation agriculture and mental comes from, and when did you first start getting interested in that?
Well, the Mintil started in about 2001, and I'm not quite. I think it might have been our agronomists sort of was suggesting to Dad that maybe we don't need to be, deep ripping the soil and heavy discs and things, and we got a consultant out in about 2001, 2002. And it was from there, really. It just sort of cascaded from there. From there, we went for min-till till 2007, stripped till, no-till in 2011, and then the cover crops and everything else. It just came one after the other, really. And it hasn't been planned. It's just been one of those things that once you get the bug, you get interested, and you wonder why you weren't doing it to start with. Yeah. But,
and there's a book by Graham Sate that had a big influence on you, Nutrition Rules.
Yeah, no, that's a book of lots of different interviews with different consultants and farmers from around the world, and that got me interested in the side of farming of the plant health and soil health, and why your plant needs a fungicide or doesn't need a fungicide. That got me interested in that side of things, realising that maybe we don't need to be using all these inputs on the farm if we get our soil and our plant healthy. And nutrition, having a balanced nutrition, is a key thing behind that. Yeah. And the one thing we do on farming is probably have a very unbalanced nutrition, because we pile on lots and lots of nitrogen with lots of weak crops that lodge and prone to disease, try and fall over, and we need lots of chemicals to keep them standing and keep them healthy. So that's where that book was a big inspiration in terms of the nutrition of the plant and the soil.
Are there any other books or any resources for anyone interested in either conservation agriculture or alternative techniques that you could recommend?
One book I would recommend is reading Dirt by David Montgomery.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just because it's not necessarily giving you any technical detail, but it helps you explain why I'm doing what I'm doing in terms of trying to minimise soil erosion. When you realise that the Roman Empire partly fell because they abused their soil, and go throughout history, the American moving west in America, that's all led because they were exhausting the soil in the east, and the Dust Bowl, and that for me is just one fascinating book of, thousands of years of history was actually linked to soil destruction, and we're probably doing the same again now around the world.
What would you say is your overall aim here on the farm?
And my aim is to have a farming system that is improving every year, growing crops by using less inputs, and leaving the soil and the business in a good health for the next generation.
So can you just give me some definitions for, let's say, start with cover cropping, which in many ways is what it says on the tin?
Yeah, so cover cropping is planting of plants that you're not necessarily going to harvest, but you plant them straight after, say, wheat harvest, which is when we normally do it in August. They get planted then, and then they spend the summer and autumn growing, and then they'll stay there until we plant our spring crop in the next March, April, and they are there to cover the soil, stop soil erosion, stop nutrient leaching, and to increase organic matter. So they are exactly their soil cover crops is how I define them.
And then when it comes to intercropping and companion cropping, which is really your specialism, let's say that, are they pretty much the same thing?
Yes, yeah, they are pretty well. There's lots of different phrases and terminology for intercropping, relay cropping, living mulches, undersowing. They're all one of the same thing, but for me the best overarching phrase is intercropping, and it really is just the growing of two or more crops in the field at the same time, with which at least one you will take to harvest, and harvest doesn't have to be with a combine, it could be with a sheep, with a cow, with a forager, but it is just having at least some time in the year having two or more crops in the same field at the same time.
Let's talk about your Nuffield Scholarship and perhaps why you decided to focus on companion cropping. How did you come to that decision?
I heard a couple of people speak, one of them being Frederick Thomas, who's quite well-known farmer from France. He came to a meeting in the UK and he started talking about companion cropping of winter oilseed rape. Frederick, he writes a magazine, TCS, he's a farmer. He was one of the founders of Base France, and he's a consultant as well. Yeah. But he was talking about mixing sort of vetch and buckwheat with your oilseed rape to try and deter pests and fix nitrogen and improve the plant health. And at the time I was like, well, I thought it was a crazy idea. What is he talking about? It's not something I'd ever even thought about.
Some of the best ideas are crazy ideas.
Yeah, and so the following year I did sort of 24-metre strip in our oilseed rape with companion crops, and it worked well, and it sort of built from there.
Tell me about some of the places that you went to, because you travelled quite widely, from France to the States to Southern Africa as well.
I went to France twice, and that's because I had quite a few contacts there, and there's some really quite innovative farmers in France. So I went to see Frederick Thomas as one, and Sarah Singler, who's in the south of France, who's also a Nuffield scholar. And anyone that I could find on the internet or someone told me was doing any companion cropping, intercropping, because it wasn't that easy to find people and researchers. So I spent a good 2 weeks in France over 2 visits, and it's probably one of my favourite places I went to.
Yep.
Then North America, so that's 2 weeks in the US and 2 weeks in Canada. That was fine, but in North America, a lot of the stuff they grow is just maize and soybeans. So even though I saw some great farmers, by the end of it, I was pretty fed up of seeing maize and soybeans. But they were doing some interesting things. Met some good people. Canada was more interesting because in the prairies of Canada, further north in sort of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, their spring cropping is very similar to our spring cropping. So some of the mixtures they were using over there were relevant to here. So I have sort of copied some ideas from the guys over there, some really innovative farmers in Canada. They farm in some fairly tough conditions.
Yeah.
And then Scandinavia, Denmark and Sweden, I went there because there was some interesting researchers and farmers, and I wanted to see what their regulation is a lot tighter. Fertiliser, pesticide regulation is a lot tighter. I wanted to see how they were coping at the time with that, because I think that's what's going to happen here. Our fertiliser.
Absolutely, yeah. Can we turn towards that? Because it's certainly a direction that we could be going in the UK. So what lessons could UK farmers learn from farmers over there?
Well, they were willing to try things. They were very inventive on the mixtures. They were growing quite a few. The farmers I saw were growing quite a few niche crops. So they were trying to add value. There's a lot more organic farming, I think, in general over there. And I guess the restrictions they had on them made them think outside the box. So there is some really fascinating people in Sweden and Denmark. And I think it's going to happen here, and it's kind of what we're trying to do here with growing niche crops, more niche crops, using less inputs. And I think, that, personally, for me, that's the way that legislation and everything is going to push us. What,
in terms of changes, if any, on the farm back here, did you take away and implement from your Nuffield, but perhaps from other things you've learned along the way?
My Nuffield gave me the confidence, meeting farmers who've been doing conservation agriculture for 20, 30 years, gave me the confidence that I could achieve my goals of reducing inputs, and improving yields over time. So there are people around the world that have already done what I want to do. So because they've done it, you know that it is possible, even though it's in a different context. So I think my Nuffield gave me the confidence, but also my Nuffield gave me a lot of very good contacts.
Yeah.
If I have an issue or an idea, I can email someone, ring someone up and say, well, what do you think? Most people are very helpful.
And so the Nuffield network, have you had many Nuffields come and visit you here?
Yes, and I've been meaning to start a guest book, but probably a bit late now, but I don't know, 20 probably. At least 3 or 4 a year. Yeah. From all around the world, which is nice. It means there's a free bed for me whenever I want to go to their place. So this is the benefit of having friends around the world. Yeah. But I must say that the one thing I did learn from Nuffield is that there's an amazing amount of very good farmers in the UK, and actually some of the best people I met were in Europe and in the UK. You don't necessarily have to disappear off to a long way around the world to find some really good people.
Let's turn back towards companion cropping. I want to talk about management and attention to detail, really, because when you go down that line, I'm assuming that, it's not an approach you take of just shove it in the ground and see what happens. It is quite management intensive.
It is, and it's quite unique to each area of the world, each county, each farm, so you have to be prepared to experiment, try a few different things. So we've been doing it for 4 or 5 years, and some of the things we're only just working out how to do them. There's not a book out there that can say, right, you put those two in together and put it at that seed rate and this is what will happen. So you have to be willing to experiment. But as we've found this year, we've done 3 experiments on farm, 2 with innovative farmers and 1 with PGIRO, and 2 out of the 3 were very successful, and we've had some extremely pleasing results economically from them. So I know that it's got a good future, but it's it's something you've got to just keep trying and experimenting.
Can you give listeners an idea of some of the things that have worked for you?
So this year we did a companion cropped, so our linseed with oats. In the previous year, I'd noticed in our linseed, wherever I had wild oats in the field, that the flax flea beetle, which is a pest which can destroy your crop, as soon as it's coming through the ground, it can nip it off and it's gone. I was noticed whether there was any wild oats in the field early on in the season, that the linseed was fine. So I decided to do an experiment and also do all our linseed with oats. And the oats were killed off after about 6 weeks.
Okay.
So we only harvested linseed, but the positive was that we had 20% higher yield in the linseed with the oats, and apart from one small field, which was about 10% of the area, none of it had an insecticide. And don't think there's many people around who've grown linseed without an insecticide. So that's been a massive success. And then the second one that was a success is what you're looking at now is spring beans and spring oats. We did that trial with PGRO, which is the Pulses development board. And that has shown that by mixing the two, that we have a £250 a hectare benefit, increased yield. That's before separation. So that's been a real positive as well. That's over and above a monoculture. So we had, in the field, we have beans by themselves, we had oats by themselves, and they had 3 different ratios of them mixed together. And the best two were about £250 a hectare, better gross margin compared to the monocrops.
And on the flip side, things that you've done that you perhaps wouldn't do again?
One thing that 2 or 3 years ago was working for us was mixing spring peas and spring oilseed rape. And first 2 years it worked well. Last year, or harvest 2018, we struggled to get the oilseed rape to grow for flea beetle, we're not quite sure why. And this year in the trial with innovative farmers with the spring oilseed rape, it just disappeared. So that's one thing now that we're trying to find a good companion for peas now, which will probably be spring barley or spring oats. But yeah, spring oilseed rape with the peas is one that now doesn't work very well.
Why aren't we seeing companion cropping everywhere?
I think it's quite a new concept. Well, it's not a new concept. We've been doing it for 5,000 years, but it's a new concept to this generation. Probably to a lot of people it seems too difficult to manage, possibly. A lot of people don't have the separation machinery, so that is one big barrier, is being able to separate. We've built our own separator to separate the two. That is probably as a barrier for some people. It's quite a new thing, and like most things, a bit like same as cover cropping. 10 years ago I was doing it and people thought what am I doing? And now it's probably quite something that's talked about, and a higher percentage of people do it. I think companion cropping will be the same in another 5 years. I think you will start to see more people once we learn a lot more about it.
What's next for you over the next few years, business-wise, crops-wise, trials-wise?
I've got in the ground at the moment, I've got some companion crops with wheat, which we can go and have a look at. So 45% of our farm is covered in winter wheat. So if I want to get to my goal of companion cropping almost everything, I need to work out what goes with wheat. So we're trialling that this year, see how that goes. I'll be doing beans and oats again, hopefully with PGRO on a bigger scale, and we're going to look into the disease reduction by mixing them as well. So more focus on the disease. We know it works as a mixture, but one of the big diseases in beans is chocolate spot, and it's been shown in the past that mixing with a cereal can dramatically reduce chocolate spot. So that's of interest. In terms of business-wise, I've now started consulting as well on everything that we're talking about. So that's something that's starting to take off, and things change so quickly that who knows what's around the corner.
Yeah. With a young family as well.
With a young family as well, yeah.
we're going to turn towards the 1 minute soapbox. So listeners, this gives guests 1 minute to talk about a subject of their choice, and this could be anything at all. It could be farming, it could be non-farming. And have you got any ideas of what you might want to talk about? But 1 minute on the clock starting now.
So my subject is farm size and the drive over the last probably 50, 60 years for farms to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And my issue with that is it economically, ethically, socially a good thing? My argument would be that socially, the rural community, there's less and less people in it. Rural businesses have suffered by farms getting bigger. Ethically, if you get bigger, someone else loses out. And that might be a person retiring, so maybe it's not preventing someone else farming that land. But on the same things, really, someone retiring, I think we should be encouraging young people into the industry. And with so few people having control over so much land, it's very difficult for the younger generation to come in.
Very good.
Could have gone on a lot longer.
Usual way. Well, let's head out the grain store and go into a field.
Okay.
So we're just going to do a section on, I suppose, life beneath our feet. Andy, tell me where we're currently standing and what you've got on your spade there.
We're currently in a field of grass seed that has already had its 2 harvests. So next year we'll be going into spring beans. And we started growing grass seed 2 years ago because I wanted to get a perennial plant into the system for a few reasons. One, for grass weed control, but mainly for improvements in soil health, because a perennial crop will always have deeper roots and it stays there all year. It is green 24/7 for 2 years, and that's pumping carbon into the soil. It just does the soil a lot of good. So from this we've had grazing income, we've had silage income, we've had seed income, thrashed hay income, and hopefully we've improved our soil at the same time. So it has so far been a win-win for us, really, grass seed. I'm sure we're going to have a wet, horrible harvest one year and I'll be cursing it. But like all things in farming, everything's a risk, and it's not going to be good every year, but just the overall benefits to the rotation to the soil and weed control, it seems to work for us.
Tell me about when it comes to marrying and mixing perennials and annuals. What are some of the main options?
Well, the main option would be a living mulch, which is having a permanent understory of a legume, normally a clover or lucerne, and that's what I've tried to do out here. So the idea is that understory is there for about 3 or 4 years, and it's holding the soil together, supplying nutrients to your cash crop, and hopefully reducing your nitrogen fertilizer needs and your other input needs as well. So that's what I'm trying to do here, but how successful, I'm not sure. The other way of doing it is adding a annual to a perennial. So I planted for a Sussex farmer in Sussex, a cattle farmer in Sussex. I went to his poorest, oldest perennial permanent pasture, and I planted I think it was 8 or 10 way mix of annual, fast-growing annuals in there in beginning of June, but in September he said that cover crop or forage crop that were planted straight into the pasture was about the only green field in the area.
Yeah.
So he got extra grazing at a difficult time of year from that annual forage in his grass field, and he hasn't had to kill his grass field, so he doesn't need to reseed or anything.
Andy Howard, who spoke to me all about companion cropping down in Kent. Big thanks to him for giving me some of his time back in November. Next time, we're travelling to the North York Moors, where I spoke to Robin Asquith, another Nuffield scholar who manages a care farm there. So we spoke all about care farming and what that is. I hope you can join me then. In the meantime, thank you very much for listening. Please share this episode with somebody who you think might enjoy it, and I look forward to you joining me next time on Meet the Farmers.